We were hoping this would get here in time. John Casey's new book has arrived in the bookstore. I'm pretty sure he'd still sign a copy for you if you ask nicely. Thank you. One other really exciting announcement that I can't skip. I need to say congratulations to our very own Amelia Phillips, who found out this morning, immediately following her staff reading right at this podium, that she is a finalist for the Ruth Lilly Fellowship this year. Congratulations. We have assigned our last agent meetings. The Brower and Zuckerbrot meeting schedules will be out on the table at dinner, so go by and see if you'll have a meeting. Please join us immediately following this reading at the Archives, which is the building just past the library. We can all just walk over there together for a reception. And now Wyatt and Randall have some sort of presentation to make, so I'll invite them up.
Diane, come please. No, this is part of it. Okay, this is for John.
Thank
to
you.
take home, and Randall is the gardener, and we had a conversation about pickled okra.
Do I have to eat it? Oh my God, what sadists. Just as I was going to begin praising Sewanee for its extreme generosity, the dark side comes out. So, do I have to eat it in front of everyone?
You take it in your fingers and start at the little tip, to the other end.
I can't believe this. Oh,
Yes.
all right, it's not so bad. It's kind of spicy. No. So it's not that slimy stuff that sometimes you encounter in a stew. I appreciate that. Are these your homemade?
It's Randall will bring us more next year.
Yes, I will, promise.
Who put them up?
Oh, these were some wife for Barbara.
Oh, good. Well, thank you very much.
You want me to leave this up here, or should we take it?
Take it, please. So good. Well, it's definitely going to take me a while to compose myself after that. Now I'm setting the clock here. Oh no. Okay. I'm going to start. Thank you, Wyatt. Thank you, everyone, for having me. It's always so wonderful to be here, and this kind of ritual of passage, I now feel more firmly Sewanean than ever. I'm not going to read from my book Flyover Lives, which came out in January, because I really read most of it here already, and so and I think of Sewanee as being really the cradle or inspiration, at least the generous supporter of that book, and I'm hoping to feel at least some good vibes and get some advice for something new, which I'm literally going to read all that I have of it. It's the beginning of a novel. And so, like all beginnings, it'll seem a little diffuse. And so I ask you to bear with that. It's presenting the characters and so on. The inspiration is Anthony Trollope's novel, The Way We Live Now. Other people have updated that wonderful Victorian novel. But anyway, this will be my attempt. I'm going to read that, and then a story that came out some years ago, which could in some ways be thought of as a continuation of flyover lives. Peggy Mott Tilden is writing an email book review to Amazon. She writes with affection but not much conviction about the recently published volume of her mother's art lectures. She signs the review with her own name, Margaret M. Tilden, but omits spelling out her maiden name, Mott, so that the connection with her mother, Lorna Mott Dumas, wouldn't be too obvious. Amazon could easily look Margaret M. Tilden up. She didn't want to deceive exactly. Having loved Mrs. Dumas' lectures since I heard them once in Baltimore, I rejoice in having a print copy, especially about the small Redon landscapes and also her work on the neglected painter Ernest Meissonier. Privately, she was afraid her mother's lectures might be a little light and superficial, and found embarrassing the stagey English voice, well-rehearsed poise, and theatrical gestures with which Lorna delivered them on the podium, so unlike the real-life woman, a transformation that unsettled Peggy even at her age. On stage, Mother's voice acquired an unfamiliar resonance, and her gestures had a practiced confidence, as if, were you to stop her and she had to start over, they would come out exactly the same each time. Same flutter of the hand by her left ear, accompanying certain phrases, evolving to a dramatic finger pointing at the audience. A gesture learned from watching videos of Margaret Thatcher. Peggy and her siblings had seen Lorna watching Mrs. Thatcher over and over on YouTube confront a mining official. Peggy didn't tell her mother that she was writing these reviews because Lorna would definitely forbid it, even though she wouldn't be displeased. A related scruple kept Peggy from checking to see whether her reviews had ever been posted by Amazon. She just flung them out spontaneously like broadcast seeds, hoping one would flourish in the vast internet topsoil and start some crop of virus in behalf of Lorna's book. They all, the whole family, badly needed money. They seemed hopeless. Peggy, she knew herself, among the worst. Peggy Tilden was in Ukiah, California, where she kept herself going. She made cheese and jam in her backyard shed and worked in the local library. By nature optimistic, she nonetheless, when she really thought about her situation, almost 50, alone, divorced, and stone poor, could get fits of despair. Her mother, Lorna, was really hard up, too. Men had been difficult for both of them. Peggy sometimes thought that Lorna hadn't prepared her daughters correctly for a world with men in it. She tried to tell her own daughter, Julie, certain realities while avoiding cynicism or bitterness. And so far, Julie had been so free of man troubles, Peggy had started to worry the other way. Peggy had nothing but worries, almost immediately knowing beginning with something she'd signed yesterday, almost immediately knowing she shouldn't have. A loan form. It sounded like a godsend the way the man had explained it. We contact people recently divorced, he said. We figure they could usually use some help. Our aim is to help people. Sure it was. She saw it now. Now that it was probably too late, the thing was signed, harnessing her to an unbelievable interest rate, other clauses that seemed to have written themselves onto the pages after it was too late. Her mother, the art lecturer, Lorna herself, meantime, had flown into San Francisco, exhausted after appearances in St. Paul, Minnesota, Tucson, and Bakersfield, and had let herself into her friend Pam's flat, a place Pam was graciously lending her for a couple of months. Excuse me. Lorna was homeless. Now their own house in Cormoran-les-Puits, France, was being sold. To enforce her feeling of rootless destitution, the airline had lost her bag and had promised to send it round when it was found. Meantime, she had nothing to unpack, but just plunked herself down in a chair by the window and treated herself to the expansive and beautifully nuanced pinkish-gray landscape of buildings, bridges, the cobweb of mist over the bay that were the glory of this view from the top of Russian Hill. Her friend Pam's apartment had the brave but losing look, familiar among Lorna's contemporaries, of a downsizing person of a certain age and former affluence. Some art objects, photos of grandchildren, too much furniture, books crammed in, She looked around. She looked into the bedroom closet. Pam had considerately pushed her own clothes to one end, leaving some rack space. Pam's shoes, too big for Lorna, looked forlorn on their tidy rack. But Lorna could get along here very well and hoped to God Pam would stay in the country a while longer. The apartment's musty, uninhabited smell would soon dissipate, as would the old clothes odor of the closet, aging mingled with sachet. Screaming sirens now drew her attention back to the window and a developing scene 10 stories below. Figures moving up Jones Street and 24 motorcycle police. Blue lights flashing, though it was twilight, the noise of their sirens filling the resonant canyon formed by the walls of this building and its home log on the other corner where the imposing escort was just pulling up. A curious detail, on either side of the doorway of that building, an apartment building, stood men with pikes, wearing black Mad Hatter hats, red tights, and red-skirted mini dresses with white roofs and crimson stockings. As in travelogues about England, they stood at attention as several men alighted from a Chrysler town car and walked toward the building, 2 of them at a respectful distance behind the third. A dignitary, it was easy to conclude, going to visit the former governor who lived in the penthouse of the ritzier building across the street. An English dignitary, judging from the beefeater costumes, which looked ridiculous in the San Francisco twilight. Why the costumes? Maybe it was a film shoot. Wasn't there a hotel downtown that had those costumed doormen? Who could warrant such effort? Surely it couldn't be Prince Charles. From her perch, it was impossible to tell. It could have been Prince Charles, who walked quickly into the building without glancing at the beefeaters. But what would he be doing in San Francisco? She pulled herself away from the window, but turned back at the rising sound of a crowd and chanting the oompa of a tuba. A little scrum of new people was streaming along Green Street, waving placards she couldn't read from here. Now they were milling around the intersection of Jones and Green, and the policemen were letting them. Never mind. She found a market basket in Pam's rudimentary kitchen, put on her jacket, and got the elevator down. In the street, much to her surprise, the first person she spied, there among the protesters or whatever they were, was her own granddaughter Julie, or Peggy's oldest girl, noticeable for her strident beauty and queenly presence, carrying a placard that said, "Poodle, go home." A wave of jet-lagged fatigue swept over Lorna. She'd called Julie when she felt stronger, but for now put her head down and scurried along Green where she thought there might be a convenience store. Relieved when no one noticed her or called out. She couldn't face other people just yet. It couldn't actually have been Julie, she told herself. It was just a human tendency to see people you recognize among the faces in a new place. It was a form of hopeful adaptation, of trying to feel at home. In the Fog Corner convenience store, however, there was someone she really did know and couldn't avoid. Phil Train, the Reverend, or maybe very Reverend Train. He'd been at Stanford with her many decades ago. She'd heard he was a successful cleric now, and he did wear a turned collar and a black jacket and had an efficient, close haircut, gray and crisp like a coach. From the slightly furtive expression that had crossed his features for a second when he saw her, she thought he might have been buying cigarettes. But if so, he had hastily annulled them. His cathedral, she remembered, would be just nearby. With the practiced sociability of the cloth, he engaged her immediately. "Lorna, my dear," they exclaimed about the interval, 40 years, 50. She found herself telling him, as they stood there, what she'd been doing in the interval. Her own spiel had been honed by numerous interviews she had given in local papers in various medium-sized towns. And now my lectures have come out as a book, so I've been on the road book touring for a few weeks. I'm staying at Pam Linden's apartment up the street. That is, Pam's away, I'm borrowing it. I've stupidly leased my house. Of course, it was more complicated than that. I live in France most of the time, in Cormoran-les-Puys in the south. I was married to a Frenchman. She was afraid she was babbling. An image appeared to her of her former husband, Hervé Dumas. "You married Rand Mott," Phil remembered her first husband. "Yes, well, a lifetime ago," she agreed. He didn't contribute anything about his own life, meantime. The convention being, she supposed, that a clergyman's life had been too upright and uneventful to bear recounting. At Stanford, he was dating Cerise Boatwright, she remembered, and had been the biggest binge drinker in the Alpha Nu house. "Did you see the protesters?" asked Phil. "It seems that we're the enemy now." "Yes, what were they protesting?" "The union of world faith." Faith. Aspects of her life she didn't go into with Phil Train came nonetheless rushing into her mind. Walking back to the apartment, she felt her heart speed up at thoughts of the general mistakes of her life and her present shaky finances, the imminent foreclosure of her son Kurt's house, the balloon clause coming due, the amount of the note Lorna had signed in his behalf, the rocketing medical costs for Kurt, her own troubles concentrating on work, the humiliation of hustling for lectures, trying to find new subjects, the pathetic fees you got, the occasional book review, all these cares tumbled to her mind during the simple 5-minute walk from Fog Corner to the corner of Green and Jones. No one problem formulated clearly, just a general sense of having botched her life, with opportunities of fixing it getting more limited the older she grew. All this reflection brought on by the simple expression of interest from a clergyman doing his job of appearing interested. How odd that the very Reverend Train remembered her marriage to Randall Mott. Rand was still a presence in her life in an odd way, in that via his rich wife, he assumed a lot of the costs their 4 now middle-aged children ran up. But she hadn't seen him in decades and had almost forgotten their personal relationship. She sometimes wondered if she'd recognize him on the street. How odd that old divorces were usually assumed to be wounds, life failures, scars on the psyche. She had loved her divorce and never thought about it now, all those decades later. She should have reassured Phil Train she didn't feel it now. Lorna, thinking about her own life as she described it to Phil Train, was almost resentful that her anonymous arrival today from Tucson for a stay potentially restful and not stranded about by memories and family problems had been busted by not one but 2 representatives of real-world responsibility and duty, a grandchild and someone who had known her in college. Now the thoughts could not be kept back. "I don't give a damn," Rand had said. "I'm not paying Peggy's mortgage. She's a grown woman, and I'm not asking my wife for any more money for your children," as if they weren't his children too. There was another thought, memory, to be put down. "I don't give a shit," is what he'd said. Her ex-husband, Rand's new wife, not new, probably 15 years or more, his wife Amy, had a ton of money and was generous with it. But his pride, spurious emotion masking malice, wouldn't let him ask her for anything. The protesters had vanished. The Chrysler town car still stood in the intersection with several motorcycle police, but the costumed beefeaters were no longer there. Had it been Julie? As she came in, the doorman handed her a note, scribbled on lined paper that she read in the elevator. "Grandma, if that was you, are you here? Amazing. Call me, please. I need to talk over something very important. How long are you staying? Love and kisses, Julie. 325-7690. And now here was Julie. Lorna's granddaughter, Julie, was the daughter of Lorna's daughter, Peggy, and Peggy's ex-husband, Dick Tilden, and was a junior at Berkeley, majoring in peace and conflict studies, PACS. God knew what it was. Dick Tilden protested when asked her to pay. Let her do something practical, and then I'll pay. And now, along with the note to Lorna, she'd enclosed a brochure, something about studying in Greece. Says the brochure, "We will be choosing students who are creative, adventurous, and turned on to life. You have to be self-motivated, self-aware, poised, and someone who can forget self in the service of others." And yes, grades count too. And it's the beginning of chapter 2. The village of Cormorant-le-Puy, in the guidebook's words, is favorably situated at a convenient driving distance from the sea and benefiting from an elevated position in the foothills of the Vaucluse. Boasts of more than 30 historical monuments, including Roman ruins, a tower from the 13th century, the Porte de Fernand from the 14th, chapel, ritual Jewish bain, the summer chateau of the Counts of Toulouse, chapels, fountains, and walls. Its climate had ensured its prosperity over the century, but in the 21st it had fallen into decline. The local manufacture of a certain form of earthenware double sauce boat, adapted to separating fat off gravy, had fallen behind, and the town's young people had left for business schools or jobs as au pair girls and tutors of French in Scandinavia, where they promulgated on their uncritical patrons the rough local accent with its heavily rolled R's so derided by Parisians. Meantime, in Cormorant, there was now a proportion of British expatriates above the percentage sociologists deemed necessary to avoid resegregation, and so it had become a little English-speaking enclave. This, in turn, enabled what prosperity they enjoyed by bringing an enthusiastic group of American cookery writers and chefs enamored of a species of local onion, the Allium tanaceum. The present mayor, Monsieur Louis Pernois, and several other citizens had gathered to discuss a civic crisis, the disastrous slippage in the heavy rains of a day ago of the cemetery, which had, with the stealth of a nocturnal predator, dislodged itself in the night and slid 500 meters downhill, where the astonished citizenry had found a sticky mound of treacherous clay, burst coffins, broken stones, corpses, and bones, leaving behind only the oldest gravestones, a few of which had remained standing with unseeing dignity above the chaotic sacrilege. The problem was how to clean up the mess while respecting the distress of people whose loved ones, in whatever state of putrefaction or petrification, now lay entangled and anonymous in literally a potter's field of the same clay the village used for making its famous earthenware. One of the council members was Monsieur Hervé Dumas, no relation to the writer, a rattled, amiable old raconteur who hung around Le Pericole, the local bar buffet, and was said to have once been a noted theatrical director. He had views on most things, and occasional wisdom. No one discounted his views, though his anecdotes were sometimes questioned. His American wife that was had also been liked, a pretty, nervous woman who left him sometime in the past decade. It was unclear when her frequent absences had become the status quo. Now their house was leased to an English family and was also for sale. Monsieur Dumas lived in rented pleasant rooms over the boulangerie. Some thought Madame Houchon, wife of the baker, had been seen climbing his stairs. Among the exhumed bodies were several whose disorderly resurrection might get noticed in the papers. These were a local saint, Richard Elmore, the noted American painter, and Roland Bussy de Larimont, former mayor and from a prominent family, the Larimont. The names of dozens of others would have to be divined from the cemetery records, which would take time, but these were a few the council could remember off the tops of their heads. They foresaw that DNA expertise would be required and other expensive technical assistance that in former days people would not have expected. Where they had the names of families whose loved ones or ancestors were likely among the jumble of bones, they would assume that such people, once contacted, would be responsible for picking up an appropriate proportion of the cost. Elmore, the American painter, said Monsieur Dumas. Remember him? Old fellow who painted hundreds of views of the church? Alone, forgotten these days, but I happen to know that my former wife has made a fortune giving lectures about him. So, and that's as far as I've got. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'll just start this other. Now, this is some time ago. If you imagine, it's probably, it must be taking place in sort of the 90s, and it's a couple, the I speaker and a man called John. And it came from a book of travel stories with these thinly disguised personages in them, and probably belongs to that genre of auto-fiction that we've been talking about a little bit. We've been talking about genre, and I have to say my heart did sink when I heard Alan Weir's very exigent definition of literary fiction. I'm not sure where these things fit. Anyway, the ship, the Dolphin, was smaller than one could have imagined. Where could 16 people possibly sleep? Brown stains from rusted drain spouts spoiled the hull. Gray deck paint splattered ropes and ladders. Orange primer showed through the chips. Wooden crates of lettuce and cabbages were stacked on the deck, and a case of peas in giant tin cans. This cruise had been John's idea, so I tried not to seem reproached or shocked at the tiny, shabby vessel. But I'm not fond of travel in the paint spouts spoiled the hull. Paint splattered ropes and hull. Gray deck showed through the chips. Wooden crates of lettuce and ladders, orange primer deck, and a case of peas. Cabbages were stacked on the... This cruise had been John's idea, so I tried not to seem reproached or shocked at the tiny, shabby vessel. But I'm not fond of travel in the spouts spoiled the hull. Paint splattered ropes and hull. Gray deck showed through the chips. Wooden crates of lettuce and ladders, orange primer deck, and a case of peas. Cabbages were stacked on the... This cruise had been John's idea, so I tried not to seem reproached or shocked at the tiny, shabby vessel. But I'm not fond of travel in the spouts spoiled the hull. Paint splattered ropes and hull. Gray deck showed through the chips. Wooden crates of lettuce and ladders, orange primer deck, and a case of peas. Cabbages were stacked on the... This cruise had been John's idea, so I tried not to seem reproached or shocked at the tiny, shabby vessel. But I'm not fond of travel in the spouts spoiled the hull. Paint splattered ropes and hull. Gray deck showed through the crates of lettuce and ladders, orange primer deck, and a case of peas. Chips. Wooden cabbages were stacked on the... had been John's idea, so I tried not to seem reproached or shocked at the tiny, shabby vessel. But I'm not fond of travel in the spouts spoiled the hull. This cruise paint splattered ropes and hull. Gray deck showed through the crates of lettuce and deck, and a case of peas. Ladders, orange primer chips. Wooden cabbages were stacked on the... so I tried not to seem... had been John's idea, reproached or shocked at the tiny, shabby vessel. But I'm not fond of travel in the spouts. I'm not fond of travel in the vessel. But I'm shocked at the tiny, shabby... reproached or shocked had been John's idea, so I tried not to seem... Cabbages were stacked on the chips. Wooden ladders, orange primer deck, and a case of peas. Crates of lettuce and showed through the hull. Gray deck paint splattered ropes. This cruise spouts. I'm not fond of travel in the vessel, but I'm shocked at the tiny, shabby... reproached or shocked had been John's idea, so I tried not to seem... Chips. Wooden ladders, orange primer deck, and a case of peas. Crates of lettuce and showed through the hull. Gray deck paint splattered ropes. This cruise... a hemisphere away. The other passengers came on board, one by one or two by two. Cases clattered on the metal gangs. To me, only one person looked possible, a tall, handsome, youngish man with scholarly spectacles and a weathered yachting cap. The rest were aged, fat, plain, wore shapeless brown or navy blue coat sweaters buttoned over ponchos, had gray perms and bald spots, and they all spoke in the accent that I disliked, as if their vowels had been slammed indoors. They spoke like cats. I thought, ew, fat Australians not looking fond of nature. Why were they all Australians not looking fond of fat Australian cats? I thought, ew. aliens, not looking for no fat or stray cats. I thought, ew. Aliens, not looking for no fat or stray cats. I thought, ew. Aliens, not looking for no fat or stray cats. I thought, ew. Aliens, not looking for cats. I thought, ew, fat or stray. Aliens, not looking for cats. I thought, ew, fat or stray. Aliens, not looking for cats. I thought, ew, fat or stray. Aliens, not looking for cats. I thought, ew, fat or stray. Aliens, not looking for cats. I thought, ew, fat or stray. Aliens, not looking for cats. I thought, ew, fat or stray. Aliens, not looking for cats. I thought, ew, fat or stray. Aliens, not looking for cats. I thought, ew, fat or stray. Aliens, not looking for cats. I thought, ew, fat or stray. Aliens, not looking for fat or stray cats. I thought, ew. aliens, not looking for no fat or stray cats. I thought, ew. But it wasn't different. It was the same each day. I don't care. I do hate them. I ranted passionately to John. I'm right to hate them. They're what's the matter with the world. They're consumers. They can't look at a shell unless it's coated in plastic. They never look at the sea. Why are they here? Why don't they stay in Perth and Adelaide? You could buy shells there. Of course, John didn't have any answer for this. Of course, I was right. Whenever I was left alone, I found myself harking back to the court hearing. My recollections just as sharp and painful as a week ago. I couldn't keep from going over and over my ordeal and thinking of my hated former husband. No, not him so much really as his lawyer, Waxman, a man in high-heeled boots and aviator glasses. I imagined him here on Dream Island. He has fallen overboard at the back of the ship. I am the only one to notice. And I have the power to cry out for rescue, but I don't. Our eyes meet. He is down in the water, still wearing the glasses. I imagine his expression of surprise when he realizes I'm not going to call for help. What had been for him a mere legal game, a job, would cost him his life. He had misjudged me. This ship speeds along. We are too far away to hear his cries. It was the third day, and we'd sat down in Happy Island. Here we had to wade across a sandbar. This island had goats grazing. This is the first we've gotten wet, I bitterly complained. We stood ankle deep in water and queer, gelatinous seaweed. I had wanted to swim, to dive, to sluice away the court and memories, but hadn't been permitted to because these waters, so innocently beautiful, so seductively warm, were riddled with poisonous creatures, deadly toxins, and sharks. Be careful not to pick up anything like this, the first mate, Murray, warned us, showing us a harmless-looking little shell, the deadly cone shell. By the third day, I began to notice a sea change in our shipmates who had begun in sensible gabardines and print dresses, but now wore violently floral shirts and dresses with studded shells, wreaths of shells around their necks and at their ears, hats with crabs and gulls embroidered on. By now, I knew a little bit more about them. They were all travelers. George and Nettie, Fred and Polly had been friends for 40 years, spent a part of each year. Now they were all retired, traveling in Europe in their caravans. Dave and Rita were both school teachers, and Rita raised Great Danes. Priscilla was going along on this cruise with her brother Albert because Albert had just lost his wife. Mark was taking his annual vacation. Don and Donna were thinking of selling their Auckland real estate business and buying a sailboat to live on and sail around the world. John told me that George was a sensitive and sweet man who had lived his whole life in Australia and only now in his retirement had begun to see something of the world. And he says that the most beautiful place in the world is somewhere near Split in Yugoslavia. And if I take you there, my darling, will you for God's sake cheer up now? But I couldn't. I think I have to skip along a little. It didn't surprise me that people liked the handsome and amiable John. It didn't even surprise me that they were nice to me. I had concealed my tumult of feelings, and I was used to being treated by other people with protective affection, if only because I'm small. This in part explained why the courtroom, in its formal process of accusation, its focus on myself as the stipulated bad person, had been such a shock. It was as if a furious mob had come to smash with sticks my porcelain figure of myself. I had a brief intimation that the Australians, with their simple friendliness, could put me back together if I would let them, but I would rather lie in pieces for a while. The moon was full and golden. What a beautiful, beautiful night, said Nettie from Adelaide, the sister of George, coming out onto the beach. Who could disagree? Not even I. The ship on the moonlit water lapped at anchor, resting, awaiting looking luxurious and serene. John came out and showed us the Southern Cross. At first, I couldn't see it. All constellations look alike to me. I've never been able to see the bears or belts or any of it. But now, when John turned my chin, I did see it, and it did look like a cross. A few days passed. Maureen was gazing at the waves. It's getting choppy, she observed, unnecessarily, for the boat began to rear up like a prancing horse. Right, we probably won't make it, Marie agreed. What do you mean? I asked, alarmed by the tinge of satisfaction. To the reef. No point in going in if the sea's up like it's coming out, washed right up. No use going out there. If it's like this, we put in at Hook Island instead. Astonished, I looked around to see if John or anyone else was listening. No, we're not worried. We'd just as soon have Hook Island. People continued to knit and read along the deck, which now began to heave more forcefully, as if responding to the desire of the crew to return to port without seeing the great sight. How often does it happen that you don't go to the reef? I asked, heart thundering. The point of all this and John's dream. Oh, it happens more than not. This time of year, you know, chancy the nautical business is. Come out all the way and not see it, I insisted, voice rising. Well, you can't see it if the waves are covering it up, can you? You can bump your craft into it, but you can't see it, can you? I don't know, I cried. I don't even know what it is. So, yeah, anyway, the weather continues to act up, Christ, said Murray. One of these bloody old fools will break a hip. Folks, why don't you sit down? Immediately, like children, the Australians went inside the main cabin and sat in facing rows of chairs. Despite the abrupt change in the weather, the ship continued its course out to sea. John and I anchored ourselves in the prow, leaning against the tool chest, resolutely watching the horizon, not the bouncing deck beneath our feet, a recommended way to avoid seasickness. The dread specter of seasickness was promptly among us. The captain, rusty-haired, pale-eyed, as if his eyes had bleached with sea wind, climbed up off the bridge and glanced inside at the cabin at his passengers. Oh, please, they want to go. They'll be all right, I called to him, but the words were swept off by the wind. Well, there's a long scene of people being seasick, which I'll spare you in the interest of time. As abruptly as the storm had started, it subsided meekly. The sky once again changed color, changed color to metallic gray, lighter in the horizon, as if it were dawn. Ahead of us, an indistinguishable shape lay in the water like the back of a submerged crocodile, a vast bulk under the surface. The captain had stopped the engines, and we drifted in the water. The reef, cried the Australians coming out on deck. I shouted too. The crew began to busy themselves with readying the small boats, and the other passengers came boisterously out of the cabin as if nothing had been wrong. Ow, they said, that was a bit of a toss. If you fell on it, that you could chisel into formations dictated by your own mind. We had heard it was endangered, and I had imagined its destruction. Endangered, and I had imagined its destruction. Endangered, and I had had imagined its destruction, endangered, and I had imagined its destruction, endangered, and I had imagined its destruction, endangered, and I had destruction. Had imagined its destruction, endangered, and I had imagined its destruction, endangered, and I had imagined its destruction, endangered, and I had imagined its destruction, had imagined its destruction, had imagined its destruction, had imagined its destruction, endangered, and I had